It's a normal Wednesday afternoon in October 2025. Someone calls 911 about suspicious activity at an abandoned house in New Britain, Connecticut. Nothing too unusual, right? Maybe some kids messing around, maybe someone dumping trash. But when police arrive at 80 Clark Street, what they find in the backyard changes everything inside a large plastic storage container: the remains of a child. And here's the thing that makes this case absolutely devastating. This wasn't a recent tragedy. This little girl had been missing for over a year. Her name was Jacqueline Torres-Garcia. Her family called her Mimi. She was just 12 years old. But the discovery of her body, that was just the beginning of a nightmare that would expose one of the most horrific cases of child abuse Connecticut had seen in years. Stay with me on this one, because what happened to Mimi and how the system failed to protect her will absolutely shake you. Before we dive deep into this case, I need to tell you about Mimi because she deserves to be remembered as more than just a victim in a true crime story. According to those who knew her, Jacqueline Mimi Torres-Garcia was a bright, joyful kid who loved to dance. She had this infectious smile that could light up a room. She was funny, caring, and absolutely devoted to her younger siblings. She was the kind of kid who always looked out for others. She should be here today, probably scrolling TikTok, arguing with her siblings, dreaming about her future. Instead, on October 8, 2025, her decomposed remains were found in a storage bin behind an abandoned house. And the people charged with her murder? Her own mother, her mother's boyfriend, and her aunt. Yeah, let that sink in for a second. Let me introduce you to the people at the center of this case. First, there's Carla Garcia, Mimi's 29-year-old mother. She'd had a troubled past. When Mimi was born, Carla was actually in a detention center. Because of this, baby Mimi was placed with a relative, where she stayed until she was 9 years old. In May 2022, Carla and Mimi's father sought guardianship of Mimi and her younger sibling. The court granted it, and here's something important. The Department of Children and Families actually supported this decision at the time. Then there's Jonathan Nanita, Carla's 30-year-old boyfriend. He and Carla shared 3 other children together. Remember that detail. It becomes important later. And finally, there's Jacqueline Garcia, Carla's 28-year-old sister and Mimi's aunt. She lived with the family for a period of time and, according to investigators, witnessed things that no child should ever endure. Now the Department of Children and Families, or DCF, had been involved with this family before. In September 2022, there was an investigation involving Mimi's younger siblings, but there wasn't enough evidence to substantiate abuse or neglect. That case was closed in November 2022. For the next 2 years, DCF had no involvement with the family. At least that's what the records show, can you imagine? 2 whole years where this family was off the radar. 2 years where anything could have been happening behind closed doors. Here's where we need to pay close attention to the timeline, because it's crucial to understanding how Mimi slipped through every crack in the system. In June 2024, Carla Garcia signed a lease for a house on Wellington Drive in Farmington, Connecticut. The lease ran from June 21, 2024 to June 30, 2025. Around this same time, Carla was also granted sole custody of Mimi and one of her siblings. Jacqueline Garcia, Mimi's aunt, moved in with her sister, Nanita, and the kids sometime around June 2024. And according to her later testimony to police, what she witnessed during those summer months was nothing short of torture. Here's what Jacqueline told investigators. She saw patterns of continued abuse. She saw Mimi confined to a corner of a room. She saw her restrained with zip ties. She saw her being denied food. Jacqueline also told police that Mimi tried to run away. Not once, but twice. Think about that for a second. This child was so desperate to escape that she tried to run. But family members found her both times, brought her back, and punished her by restraining her with zip ties. When Jacqueline moved out in mid-August 2024, she told investigators something absolutely chilling. She knew Mimi was going to die. She knew, and she left anyway. According to Carla Garcia's own admission to police, Mimi died on September 19, 2024. She was 11 years old. Some reports say 12, but according to the warrants, she was 11. Here's what we know about the weeks leading up to her death, and I'm warning you, This is extremely difficult to hear. Carla Garcia told police that she and Nanita had stopped feeding Mimi for 2 weeks before she died. 2 weeks. Let me say that again. This child went without food for 14 days. Carla also admitted that they had been restraining Mimi with zip ties as punishment when she was acting bad. And get this, Jacqueline Garcia, the aunt, had even sent photos to Carla showing Mimi restrained with zip ties, lying on pee pads on the floor. When the medical examiner later performed an autopsy, they found no signs of recent trauma or injuries that would have directly caused Mimi's death. But the child was severely malnourished. She essentially starved to death in her own home, while her mother and her mother's boyfriend watched. Now, here's where this case goes from horrific to absolutely unthinkable. After Mimi died, Nanita took her body and put it in the basement of their Farmington home, just left her there. But here's the problem with hiding a decomposing body in your basement: the smell. According to the warrants, the odor from Mimi's decaying body became so strong that Carla, Nanita, and the other children couldn't even stay in the house. They ended up staying with friends or in hotels. Can you imagine that? They'd rather spend money on hotels than do the right thing, than call the police, than give this child a proper burial. Meanwhile, Mimi's body just remained in the basement. Eventually, they placed her remains in a plastic storage tote. You know, the kind you'd buy at Target to store your Christmas decorations. At the end of March 2025, the family moved from Wellington Drive in Farmington to a new address on Clark Street in New Britain. And according to Carla's own admission, she knew that Mimi's body was moved in that tote, placed in the back of Nanita's Acura, and brought to their new location. The property management company later told police that Carla was supposed to move on March 1st, but she asked for extra time to clean the house. She finally turned in the keys on March 28th. I think we can all guess what she was really doing during that extra time. Now here's the part of the story that should make everyone angry. Remember how I mentioned that DCF had been involved with this family before? Well, in January 2025, months after Mimi had already died, the agency received new allegations regarding the treatment of one of Mimi's younger siblings. So DCF caseworkers started investigating. They checked on the sibling in question, and then they asked about Mimi. And here's what Carla told them. Mimi was being homeschooled and had gone to visit a relative out of state. To verify this, DCF conducted a video call with someone that Carla claimed was Jacqueline. But Mimi had been dead for months at this point, so who was on that video call? According to investigators, the family had another child impersonate Mimi during the welfare check, and DCF bought it. They accepted this explanation, and in March 2025, they closed the case. The agency later released a statement saying that the family had deceived them, which yes, they absolutely did. But here's the question everyone in Connecticut is asking. How thoroughly was this video call actually examined? Republican Senators Jason Perillo and Stephen Harding released a statement demanding answers. We need full details of this video call. We need full transparency. This is an example of why essential state employees' remote work must be constantly reviewed, especially when it involves protecting our most vulnerable residents. Because here's the thing, if someone had looked a little closer, asked a few more questions, maybe insisted on an in-person visit, would Mimi's body have been discovered sooner? Would justice have come faster? This case has also reignited a massive debate in Connecticut about homeschooling regulations. See, around the time of her death, Carla reported that Mimi would be homeschooled, and in Connecticut, there's very little regulation around homeschooling. Parents don't need to be certified teachers. There are no mandatory check-ins, no standardized testing requirements in many cases. The Connecticut Office of the Child Advocate had actually released a report even before this case, stating that homeschooling has been used to hide abuse and that the state has minimal oversight of the system. After Mimi's case became public, online petitions started circulating calling for more regulation, periodic welfare checks for homeschooled children, registration requirements, proof of educational progress. But members of the homeschooling community have pushed back hard. They argue that the focus on education is deflecting attention away from where it really belongs. DCF, which they say should have acted to protect Mimi. And honestly, they both have a point. Yes, homeschooling can be used to hide abuse. We've seen it happen. But also, DCF did have multiple opportunities to intervene, and somehow this child still fell through the cracks. So let's fast forward to October 8th, 2025, the day everything finally came to light. New Britain police received an anonymous tip. Someone reported suspicious activity at an abandoned property at 80 Clark Street. But the tip was more specific than just suspicious activity. The caller told police that Jonathan Nanita had been seen picking up a tote in the woods of a cemetery, putting it in the back of his vehicle, driving to 80 Clark Street, and leaving it there. The tip specifically mentioned that the tote was believed to contain a body. When officers arrived at the abandoned property, they found exactly what the anonymous caller had described. In the backyard, there was a large storage container, and inside, the badly decomposed remains of a child. On Monday, October 13th, New Britain Mayor Aaron Stewart and Police Chief Matthew Marino held a press conference. As a mother, Mayor Stewart said, "This makes me sick to my stomach to be standing here today." Chief Marino confirmed that the remains had been identified as those of Jacqueline Mimi Torres-Garcia, and that the child had likely died in the fall of 2024, over a year earlier. But nobody had reported her missing. Nobody had been looking for her. She'd simply disappeared. And the only people who knew where she was were the people who'd put her in that container. On Sunday, October 12th, Carla Garcia was arrested at her home. She was charged with murder with special circumstances, conspiracy to commit murder with special circumstances, improper disposal of a dead body, and intentional cruelty to a child under the age of 19. Her bond was set at $5 million. That same day, Jacqueline Garcia, Mimi's aunt, was also arrested. She was charged with intentional cruelty to a child under the age of 19, risk of injury to a child, and first-degree unlawful restraint. Her bond was set at $1 million. The next day, Monday, October 13, Jonathan Nanita was taken into custody on a felony arrest warrant. Like Carla, he was charged with murder with special circumstances and conspiracy to commit murder. According to police, Nanita was the person who brought the container holding Mimi's remains to the abandoned property on Clark Street, the very action that led to the discovery of her body. Here's where we learn the truly devastating details of what happened to Mimi, straight from her mother's own words. When Carla Garcia spoke to police on October 9th, the day after Mimi's body was discovered, she made several admissions that are detailed in the search warrants. She admitted that she and Nanita had stopped feeding Mimi for approximately 2 weeks before her death, while they were living on Wellington Drive in Farmington. She admitted to restraining Mimi with zip ties as punishment when the child was acting badly. She admitted that her sister Jacqueline had sent her photographs of Mimi restrained with zip ties, lying on pee pads on the floor. And here's something that shows just how twisted this situation was. Carla told police that most of the punishments were under Nanita's direction. She was trying to shift blame, even though she actively participated in the abuse. Carla also told investigators that Nanita was the one who brought Mimi's body downstairs after she died. Though she claimed she didn't know what he did with it at first, but she later admitted that she knew damn well what happened. She knew Mimi's body was placed in a tote. She knew it was in the back of Nanita's car. She knew it was moved to New Britain when they relocated in late March. She knew everything. Now here's one of the most bizarre details in this entire case. Carla Garcia told police that she was planning to go on a podcast to share the story of what happened to her daughter. Yeah, you heard that right. She'd been preparing to tell her side of the story publicly. She'd even written notes on her phone about what she planned to say, essentially creating a script for her podcast appearance. What was she going to say? Was she going to paint herself as a victim? Was she going to blame Nanita entirely? Was this going to be some twisted attempt at damage control? We'll never know because she was arrested before she could follow through with it. But the fact that she was even planning this tells you something about her mindset. She thought she could spin this. She thought there was a version of this story where she came out looking, what? Sympathetic? Justified? There's no version of starving your child to death where you're the good guy. Let's talk about Jacqueline Garcia for a minute, because her role in this is complicated and deeply troubling. When Jacqueline spoke to police on October 8th and 9th, she admitted that she lived with her sister Nanita and the kids from June 2024 through August 2024. During those months, she said she witnessed patterns of continued abuse. She saw Mimi confined to a corner. She saw her restrained with zip ties. She saw her being denied food. She also told police about Mimi's attempts to run away, how the child was found, brought back, and punished with restraints. And here's the most damning part of Jacqueline's testimony. When she moved out in mid-August 2024, she told police that she knew Mimi was going to die. She knew, and she left. She didn't call the police. She didn't call DCF. She didn't grab Mimi and run. She just left. And when Carla later told her that Mimi had died on September 19th, Jacqueline wasn't surprised she'd seen it coming. Now Jacqueline is facing charges of child cruelty and unlawful restraint, but not murder. Legally, there's a distinction between participating in the abuse and being the one who actually caused the death. But morally, a lot of people would argue that if you know a child is being tortured and you do nothing, you're complicit in whatever happens next. As of now, the investigation is still ongoing. Police Chief Marino said it could take months to complete. Authorities are still working to determine the exact cause and manner of death, though the autopsy revealed that Mimi was severely malnourished and showed no signs of recent trauma that would have directly caused her death. In other words, she didn't die from a beating or a specific violent act. She died from prolonged neglect, starvation, and abuse. Investigators have obtained search warrants for phones belonging to both Carla and Jacqueline Garcia. Those phones likely contain text messages, photos, and other evidence that will paint a fuller picture of what Mimi endured in her final months. Remember those photos that Jacqueline sent to Carla showing Mimi restrained with zip ties? Those are evidence now. Any text discussing the abuse, the cover-up, the move from Farmington to New Britain, all evidence. Carla's notes about the podcast she planned to do? Evidence. Both Carla and Jacqueline were expected to be arraigned on October 15th. Jonathan Nanita's initial court date hadn't been scheduled yet, as of the latest reports. As of right now, it's unclear if any of the three defendants have retained attorneys, though you can bet they'll need good ones. After the story broke, the Connecticut Department of Children and Families released several statements. On October 13th, Interim DCF Commissioner Susan Hamilton confirmed that Mimi's siblings are safe and have been placed together in state custody. Think about those kids for a second. They lived in that house. They smelled the decomposition from the basement. They probably knew their sister's body was down there. What kind of therapy is even adequate for that level of trauma? Hamilton also said that DCF has already begun a thorough review of our history with the family. According to the agency's timeline, they first got involved when Mimi was born and Carla was in detention. They supported the guardianship decision in 2022. They investigated allegations regarding younger siblings in September 2022, but found insufficient evidence. They closed that case in November 2022. Then nothing for 2 years, the 2 years when Mimi would have been ages 9 to 11, living with her mother and Nanita. The review, DCF says, will examine our knowledge about the family, supports provided, casework decisions, adherence to policy, as well as communication and collaboration with other system and community partners. Translation: they're trying to figure out how a child under their previous supervision ended up dead in a storage bin without anyone noticing she was missing. Several Connecticut lawmakers have called for more accountability and transparency from DCF Republican senators in particular, have questioned how thorough that January 2025 video call really was. How did caseworkers not realize they were being deceived? Senator Jason Perillo and Senate Minority Leader Stephen Harding specifically called out remote work policies. This is an example of why essential state employees' remote work must be constantly reviewed, especially when it involves protecting our most vulnerable residents. The implication is clear. If someone had shown up at the house in person instead of settling for a video call, maybe they would have realized something was off. Maybe they would have asked to see Mimi in person. Maybe they would have noticed her absence. But here's the reality. DCF is chronically understaffed and underfunded. Caseworker turnover is high. The system handles an overwhelming number of cases, about 80% of which deal with neglect rather than abuse. Most cases involve poverty-related issues. families struggling to access mental health treatment, addiction services, housing, childcare. But Mimi's case wasn't about poverty. It wasn't about a struggling family that needed support services. This was torture. This was murder. And the system, despite multiple touch points with this family, failed to see it. After Mimi's remains were discovered, a makeshift memorial appeared outside the abandoned home on Clark Street. Flowers, stuffed animals, candles, cards with messages of love for a little girl that most of these people never met. A GoFundMe was set up to help with funeral costs. The organizer wrote, "Jacqueline was a bright, joyful 12-year-old who brought laughter and warmth to everyone around her. She was always smiling, loved to dance, and had a wonderful sense of humor. Jacqueline cared deeply for her siblings and was a natural caregiver, always looking out for those she loved." Reading that description, knowing what happened to her, is absolutely gutting. New Britain Mayor Erin Stewart spoke for many when she said that as a mother, the case made her sick to her stomach. But beyond the shock and the grief, there's anger at the people who did this. Anger at the system that failed to prevent it. Anger that no one, not one single person outside that house, reported Mimi missing. Unfortunately, Mimi's case isn't unique. According to the National Child Abuse and Neglect Data System, around 1,820 children died from abuse or neglect in the United States in 2022 alone. That's about 5 children every single day. And here's something that should terrify everyone. Studies show that most child abuse fatalities involve children under the age of 3, but cases involving older children, like Mimi, tend to involve prolonged abuse that escalated over time. In many of these cases, there were red flags. There were opportunities for intervention, but for various reasons, overworked caseworkers, lack of resources, families moving between jurisdictions, children being pulled out of school, the abuse continued until it was too late. The homeschooling aspect of Mimi's case has drawn particular attention because it's one of those gaps that abusers can exploit. When a child isn't showing up to school every day, there are no teachers noticing bruises, no counselors checking in, no mandatory reporters who might catch something wrong. That doesn't mean homeschooling is inherently problematic. Millions of children are successfully and lovingly homeschooled every year. But it does mean that when homeschooling is used specifically to hide abuse, there are fewer safeguards in place. Some states have much stricter homeschooling regulations than Connecticut. Some require regular assessments, home visits, proof of educational progress. Some require parents to register with local school districts. Connecticut doesn't require any of that. And after Mimi's case, there's going to be serious pressure to change that. So where does this case go from here? Carla Garcia, Jonathan Anita, and Jacqueline Garcia are all facing serious charges. Carla and Nanita are looking at murder charges, which carry significant prison time if they're convicted. The prosecution has a strong case. They have confessions, or at least admissions, from Carla about withholding food and restraining Mimi. They have testimony from Jacqueline about witnessing the abuse. They have the anonymous tip that led them to Mimi's body. They have phone records and photographs. Defense attorneys might try to argue diminished capacity, coercion, or that one defendant was more culpable than the others. They might try to paint Carla as being under Nanita's control, even though her own admissions suggest she was an active participant. But honestly, this is going to be a tough case to defend. If convicted of murder with special circumstances, both Carla and Nanita could face life sentences. Jacqueline, facing lesser charges, could still spend years in prison, and Connecticut's DCF, they're facing their own reckoning. The Office of the Child Advocate has committed to completing a comprehensive investigation into DCF's involvement with the family and the issue of Mimi's removal from school for stated homeschooling purposes. There will be recommendations. There will be calls for reform. There might even be policy changes. But none of that brings Mimi back. At the end of the day, beyond all the legal proceedings and policy debates and system failures, there was a real child at the center of this story. Jacqueline Mimi Torres-Garcia loved to dance. She had a bright smile. She was funny and caring. She looked after her siblings. She survived being separated from her mother as a baby. She survived the foster care system. She survived being reunited with her family, but she couldn't survive the people who were supposed to protect her. She was 11 years old when she died, though some reports say 12, which tells you how little attention was being paid to her existence. She spent her final weeks restrained with zip ties, lying on pee pads, slowly starving to death while her mother and her mother's boyfriend withheld food as punishment. After she died, her body was hidden in a basement for months, then moved to a storage container, then dumped behind an abandoned house. She deserved so much better. If you're watching this and you suspect a child is being abused, please make the call. The Childhelp National Child Abuse Hotline is 1-800-4-A-CHILD or 1-800-422-4453. It's toll-free, confidential, and available 24/7 in more than 170 languages. You might be wrong. The child might be fine. But if you're right, you could save a life. Mimi didn't have anyone who made that call. Or if someone suspected something, they didn't speak up, and now she's gone. This case is still developing, and as more information comes out during the trial, we may learn even more about what happened to Mimi in her final months. But what we know now is more than enough to understand that this was a catastrophic failure at every level. Family, community, and system rest in peace. Jacqueline Mimi Torres-Garcia, you deserve to grow up. You deserve to keep dancing. You deserve to be loved and protected. Before you go, I need you to do something for me, for Mimi. If this story moved you, if it made you angry, if it broke your heart, don't just close this tab and move on. Share this video. Mimi's story needs to be heard because cases like this are still happening, right now, in your state, maybe even in your neighborhood. Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss future cases where we hold systems accountable and give voices to victims who can't speak for themselves. And most importantly, if you ever suspect a child is being abused, make the call. The number's in the description. You could save a life. You could be the person Mimi needed, but never had drop a dove in the comments for Mimi. Let her know she's remembered. Let her know her story mattered. And if you're struggling with what you heard today, it's okay to step away and take care of yourself. This is heavy stuff. The resources for both reporting abuse and getting support are in the description below. Thank you for watching. Thank you for caring. And please, stay vigilant. Our kids are counting on us.